So this is Diana, and I'm talking with Sam. And the intention here is for us to share with you a little bit about what we think about Sutherland Bipolar Center. And I think one thing would be just to have people understand what the center offers that maybe isn't found elsewhere. And my part of the story is to say that when I was 20, I met and fell in love with a fellow college student. And he was a smart, funny, hardworking person, very outgoing, loved the outdoors. We got married. We both went to graduate school, got graduate degrees. He became a CEO of a medium-sized company, and I was a director of a small human service agency. We had kids. Everything was pretty good, but he had long wondered about anxiety and some other, he just felt like his emotions sometimes weren't right. And even as far back as high school, he and his parents had gone and sought help. But it wasn't until 15 years into our relationship when he finally got the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And I tell people that the day he got diagnosed, he cried. And it was not because he was sad about the diagnosis. It's because he finally understood. He finally got the answer he'd been seeking for so long, but he was sad that he had wasted many, many years when he could have maybe been doing something about that. And that he'd missed those years because he hadn't been properly diagnosed. So I think part of what we were missing is what Sutherland has to offer, and in terms of helping people get the right diagnosis, and then when they're properly diagnosed, knowing what to do about it. I tell the sad outcome, which is that the two of us spent the next 15 years trying to get the upper hand on this illness. We met with a psychiatrist 3 to 5 times a week. a month, 3 to 5 times a month. But in the end, he just felt like the illness had the upper hand, and he died by suicide. And I do feel like possibly had we found something like Sutherland, the outcome would have been different. So I was delighted to meet Sam and hear about what he has gotten from Sutherland, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I guess one question I would have for you, Sam, is, if someone came up to you and said that they'd recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and they were wondering whether Sutherland might be helpful to them, what might you tell them, either about what you think they could get there or what you feel like you got that has been helpful to you?
Well, first of all, I like to just say that bipolar can be a heavy diagnosis, but it's a diagnosis that shines a lot of light on areas that you can seek out help. And in the particular case of the Sutherland Center, they offer extraordinary help just from understanding what the diagnosis is, being around other people with the diagnosis, and seeing success stories as well. There's certainly a lot more success stories than not, and the Sutherland Center, I think, it just does a tremendous job of teaching the appropriate skills, encouraging the right patterns that you live by, and then supporting you as part of a community. And so a newly diagnosed person with bipolar, I think it's paramount that you seek after an organization like the Sutherland Center to get the core skills that you need to live a fruitful life. There's a lot of successful people with bipolar, and that was one of the biggest things that I needed to get over the hurdle with, was understanding that my dreams and my goals in life are not over because I have a diagnosis of bipolar, but really have just begun. And actually, in a lot of ways, you feel relieved with the diagnosis, like Diana says, because you now know what you've been fighting for maybe some time, and you can actually start stepping forward, looking at and believing in your future and successful future as well.
So what are some of the skills that you learned from Sutherland?
I think the biggest one for me was, obviously they teach a tremendous amount around cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. really understanding those core elements to help you live a successful life are essential to the learning. But I think the biggest thing for me personally was just getting a grasp as to this is not a life sentence. This is a new beginning. And it's an opportunity for you to live a rich life with the right skills in place. And the Sutherland Center, having all of the extraordinary expertise in the area, and psychologists and therapists and all of the staff that work to help the betterment of the people in the Sutherland Center, you are exposed to state-of-the-art, top-notch content. And we are humans. We are people that have emotions, and we have our behaviors, and we have our subconscious thoughts. And at the end of the day, we have to take that with a grain of salt and understand that there are patterns and techniques that can help manage all of those things, from depressive episodes to manic episodes, and everything to try to keep on an even keel and to understand what your status, or what your normal status quo is.
So how about one of the things that struck me was attending the lecture series, the seminar series, years later after my loved one passed, and being stunned by the things that they talked about that I had never heard about before. I think I understood years ago how important sleep was, but not from the psychiatrists we worked with, but from other stuff that I read. But of course, managing your sleep is one of the top things Sutherland talks about. And also, I think one of the things that I thought was very helpful and interesting was when they talk about knowing what your triggers are, and kind of not necessarily to say, I'm going to live my life trying to avoid triggers, because some of those triggers are actually positive things, like a job change or a love, finding somebody you fall in love with or whatever. But just recognizing that those different things in your life that are kind of highlights can be stressful, and that can be destabilizing. And so I think there's a message in there that says that yes, maybe you've been dealt a tougher blow than some people by having this illness, but it's like other illnesses as well. If you learn how to manage it and understand what sorts of things you need to do, you can live a healthy, happy life and have good relationships. And that reminds me of another thing that I thought was interesting about the seminar series, is what it says about relationships. Did you feel like it was helpful in terms of either helping other people around you understand how they could be supportive, or having you understand how your having bipolar might impact people around you?
Well, it's funny. The seminar series is a public forum for the community, family, and friends to come and learn about bipolar for a loved one or a friend. And as for the particular session that you're referring to related to the relationships one, I called every friend and said, hey, be here at this time. And so we turned the place that we were having that session into, I wouldn't say a party, but it was an environment where we brought in my closest friends and family members and just community, really to just set the stage for people with bipolar. It shouldn't be something that is feared. And I think with the status or with the stigma that's out there related to bipolar, I just wanted to, tackle it head on, and to bring in the people around me. So that's not a whisper, behind my back. It's not a comment here or there. I'd rather have it in the open, and have people feel comfortable to say, how are you feeling today? Or, what's going on in your life? Are you feeling good? Or, and I can answer honestly without fear of judgment. So I think that, healthy recovery and living with an illness like bipolar, it definitely needs to have a supportive structure around you that you can feel like you can discuss it. Mm-hmm. My sister was diagnosed bipolar at 18, and it wasn't until 10 years later when I had my first manic episode that we actually talked about bipolar around the dinner table. And I feel that it was 10 years too late. I mean, my sister is stable now and I'm stable, but at the same point, you have to look at it from a standpoint of what if we had just had it as an open discussion? What if we laughed about some of the things that I said or did when I was manic? What if we were able to, express our depression at any moment, or that we're feeling a little low today and that being okay? I kind of wish that we were in that kind of a world, and I think that we'll get there one day. But it has to start with the support system really taking the staff forward and really, accepting that this is an illness like any other, and that we can get beyond that stigma in a lot of ways.
So did that seminar in particular kind of give your loved ones some tools too to understand what you were feeling and how to help with that?
No, absolutely. The seminar series touches on so many different elements of bipolar. It touches on medication, touches on sleep, diet, exercise. Too many to name even, but it gives you such a great comprehensive understanding of the illness, and it allows, like you said, people around you to finally get questions answered that they may have never known about the illness. And like you said, sleep is a huge component of it. And my first manic episode was it came after a couple of days of feeling like I had slept a lot when I only slept 2 hours. That's an environmental thing that happened along with my obvious predisposition with my sister having my genetic disposition, having my sister already having bipolar.
So I think in addition to the things you've mentioned, the other things that strike me as being particularly helpful are one of the things that I think was missing for us that you are getting from Sutherland, as are other people who are being helped there, is that with our situation, we worked with this psychiatrist, as I said, pretty regularly, but his focus was really very much on meds only and not talking about all these other things like exercise and sleep and recognizing your triggers. And I think another thing is just managing your stress in your life and just knowing yourself well enough to take an active role in managing the illness instead of the illness managing you. And I don't feel like that was the attitude that our psychiatrist had, but I do feel like that's what you hear from Sutherland, is you can live a good, rich life. You'll have to step up to the plate, and as you would with diabetes or various other conditions. So that's one thing that I think is impressive. And I've forgotten what the other thing was.
Well, to that point related to medication in a lot of ways is it's required in a lot of ways. I mean, bipolar is such a complex illness that I wouldn't say required because I'm not a psychiatrist, but I will say that I even recently had a second episode, a manic episode, and it was purely a medication play. I was still on medication, but I was on too low of a dose, and I had another relapse, another manic episode, and I realized that that's okay. It's something that I learned. I learned that I was not in a therapeutic range of medication. I wasn't maybe taking the right medication, and so it gave me the tools to basically step forward and understand that medication is key in my case, and I think in many with bipolar's case. And then also you have other things, because it's even if someone doesn't have bipolar, health, sleep, diet, exercise, all of those things are huge in their lives. And they become even more important when you have bipolar. But to me, that just means more time in the sun.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do not mean to disparage meds. My main emphasis is that meds are not the only answer. You can do that, but you also need, they go well together, because meds can sometimes help the other things that you're working on have a better effect, and vice versa. But I also remember that one other thing that I did want to mention that I think was missing for us, and that I think that Sutherland has, which is the issue of the right diagnosis. So one of the things that I am impressed with is that Sutherland will clearly say to a person, and it sometimes does, actually, when you were told you had bipolar, that isn't the right diagnosis. Mm-hmm. We can see that it's something else, ADHD or something else. And the beauty of that is that we learned that if you don't know what the diagnosis is, if you're working under the wrong diagnosis, it's going to be tough to deal with it. And in my loved one's case, he was actually just first diagnosed with depression and was therefore put on an antidepressant, one that doesn't work for someone who has bipolar because it sent him into a manic state. So in addition to the therapy and the skills work that Sutherland offers, I appreciate the fact that they know how to spot whether it really is or is not bipolar, and then you're going to be working from the proper diagnosis, and it increases your chances of getting things into a place where you can live a good, rich life. So is there anything else that you would like to mention that you feel like is something people should know about Sutherland?
Yeah, the Sutherland Center, it has all the tools at play. I mean, it has seminar series that's open to the public. You can get access to group therapy sessions, which you're around maybe a small group of 8 to 10 other people with bipolar to work on some really deep, rich skills related to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that gives you a good community, if you will, to run ideas off of other people, see how people are doing things differently than you might be, and giving you a lot of opportunity to make those appropriate shifts in your life. You also have access to individual therapy if that's the case. And then they are Sutherland Center is continuing to put out resources and content to make it readily available to the community, just because they have a core belief that this kind of content and this rich information should not be disclosed, but it should be readily available and it should be accessible. And knowing that you have so many different layers of support and groups and access to content that the Sutherland Center puts out, I think really, really gives anyone that's associated with the Sutherland Center a big leg up.
And I think there's one other service at least that is offered there that you haven't mentioned, which is family therapy. So I guess you might hear from the two of us that we think that there's a lot to be gained from consulting with an organization like Sutherland, and we're really lucky that we have it in Colorado. So you can find more information on the website, and we really encourage you to do that. And thanks, Sam, for talking to me.
My pleasure.